The saloon doors swung open, and the noise died like a candle snuffed out. Every eye in the place turned to Tabitha Kingsley. The whispers started up, a dry, rustling sound like snakes in the dead grass. Sweetwater, Wyoming was a hard place in 1878, and it was even harder on a woman who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. Jared Walsh, the blacksmith's boy with a mouth sharper than any tool his father ever forged, let out a loud laugh. "Well, looky here. The quiet Miss Kingsley has come to grace us with her presence." His friends snickered into their whiskeys. "Maybe she'll tell us a story." The laughter rolled through the room, hot and suffocating. Tabitha clutched her basket of mended clothes, her knuckles bone white. The ridicule was a familiar cloak, heavy and scratchy, but one she'd been forced to wear for so long it felt like a second skin. Her throat went tight, not with words fighting to get out, but with the old, familiar ache of being the town's main attraction. A freak to be stared at. But this time, someone else was staring. From a dark corner, a pair of steel-gray eyes watched the whole thing unfold. Vaughn Forrester had ridden into Sweetwater 3 days ago. His reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory had arrived a week before he did. He'd seen his share of cruelty on the frontier, and he was seeing it now. His voice cut through the laughter, low and dangerous. "Seems to me the men who make the most noise are the ones with the most to hide." It wasn't a shout. It was something quieter and far more powerful. The room went dead silent. Jared Walsh puffed out his chest. "And who in the hell are you, stranger?" Vaughn Forrester stood up and up. He was taller than anyone in the room, with the kind of build that suggested he could end a fight before it even started. Just a man who values a little peace and quiet. He looked past Walsh, his eyes finding Tabitha's. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she looked up from the floorboards. He gave a slow tip of his hat. "Ma'am, I believe I left an order for some mending at your shop. If you'll allow me, I'll escort you back so I can pick it up." It was a lie. A clean and simple lie. But the look in his eyes was the truest thing Tabitha had seen in years. She gave a single sharp nod. He offered his arm, and as she took it, the whispers in the saloon were replaced by a thick, stunned silence. The stranger didn't just defend her. He acted like he knew her. The Wyoming sun was a harsh slap of reality after the dim saloon. As they walked down the dusty main street, Tabitha felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. She glanced up at the man beside her. "Vaughn Forrester," he said, before she could even pull out the small notepad and pencil she carried everywhere. "Working the new stock over at the Caldwell Ranch." He slowed his long strides to match her shorter ones. "I don't actually need any mending," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "Figured you might need a reason to leave." She nodded, grateful, and finally pulled out her notepad. Her pencil flew across the page. "Thank you. I'm Tabitha Kingsley." Vaughn read the note and a small smile touched his lips. "A pleasure, Miss Kingsley. Seems the good folks of Sweetwater have forgotten their manners." She wrote again, her hand moving with practiced speed. "They were kinder before the silence." The words hung between them, unwritten but perfectly understood. "Well," he said, his gaze sweeping the street, taking in the staring faces in the windows. "I've found that the quietest people are often the ones worth listening to." He glanced down at her. "May I see you home?" She hesitated, her pencil hovering over the paper. "People will talk." Vaughn shrugged, a simple gesture that dismissed the entire town. "Let 'em. Their words are just wind in the sagebrush." So they walked, the mute seamstress and the mysterious cowboy. And for the first time in 3 long years, Tabitha didn't feel like she was walking alone. There was a stillness about Vaughn Forrester, a pocket of calm in the storm of her life. But she couldn't shake the feeling that his calm was just the surface of something much deeper and much more dangerous. They reached her small house on the edge of town, the little sign that read, "Kingsley Mending," swinging gently in the breeze. "Tell you what," Vaughn said, touching a small tear on his jacket sleeve. "I might have some real work for you after all." He smiled, and it changed his whole face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. "If you're taking new customers, that is." Tabitha nodded, gesturing for him to come inside. The workshop was her sanctuary, neat and tidy, with bolts of fabric organized like books in a library. He took off his jacket and laid it over a chair. "I'll be back for it tomorrow," he said. Then he paused at the door, turning back to her. "And Miss Kingsley," he said, his voice serious now, "your silence doesn't make you less than them. It makes you more." He left. Tabitha stood frozen in the middle of her shop, his words echoing in the quiet. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Everyone saw her silence as a lack, a weakness, a tragedy. This stranger, he saw it as a strength. That night, as she repaired the tear in his jacket, with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, she wondered, who was Vaughn Forrester? And why did it feel like he was seeing right through her? The next day, Vaughn returned as promised. He inspected the mended jacket, a look of genuine admiration on his face. "This is the finest work I've ever seen." She wrote down her usual fee. He placed twice that amount on her table. She frowned, ready to protest on her notepad, but he gently placed his hand over hers. "Good work deserves good pay," he said. His touch sent a strange jolt through her. "But I was hoping to ask for something else." Tabitha looked up, her brow furrowed in a silent question. "The Caldwells are having a gathering Saturday night," he explained. "They invited all the ranch hands. I'm not much for parties, but Mrs. Caldwell insisted. Said she hoped you'd come too. Said you've been missed." Tabitha's heart gave a painful thud. The Caldwells. It was at their party, 3 years ago, that the silence had fallen, the night her world had ended. Her pencil trembled as she wrote, "I don't go to parties." "I know," Vaughn said softly. "But I'd be honored if you'd accompany me. We can leave any time you want. No questions asked." His gaze was steady, unwavering. He wasn't pitying her. He was asking her. It was a subtle difference, but to Tabitha, it was everything. He seemed to sense her inner turmoil. "Just think on it. I'll come back Friday for your answer." After he was gone, Tabitha sank into a chair, the room spinning. The Caldwell Ranch, the place where her voice had been buried. The thought of facing all those people, all their staring, pitying eyes. It made her physically ill. But the thought of Vaughn standing beside her, a solid, calming presence, that made the impossible seem, for just a moment, possible. That night she unlocked the old cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside, wrapped in linen, was her mother's favorite dress, a deep, midnight blue silk. She hadn't looked at it in years. Maybe it was time. On Friday, when Vaughn knocked on her door, she didn't reach for her notepad. She simply handed him a piece of paper. It had one word written on it. Yes. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming up over the mountains. "I'll pick you up at 6. Saturday evening, the Caldwell Ranch house was lit up like a star that had fallen to earth. Tabitha's hands were ice cold. Her stomach was a knot of pure fear. She wore her mother's blue dress, which she'd painstakingly altered to fit her own frame. Vaughn stood on her porch, looking like he'd stepped out of a different world. No dusty trail clothes, but a crisp shirt and a dark vest that matched his eyes. He just stared at her for a long moment. "Miss Kingsley," he finally breathed. You look magnificent." She blushed, and in the buggy ride to the ranch, he didn't press her for conversation. He seemed to understand that all her energy was focused on just getting through this. As they pulled up to the house, he stopped the buggy. "Remember," he said, his voice low and for her alone. "You give me the signal, and we're gone. I don't care who we're talking to." She squeezed his arm, a silent thank you. Mrs. Elena Caldwell greeted them at the door, her smile warm and genuine. "Tabitha, my dear, it's so wonderful to see you." She took both of Tabitha's hands in hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, almost desperate. "I'm so glad you came. There's something we need to discuss." Before Tabitha could even process that, Mr. James Caldwell was there, clapping Vaughn on the back. "Forrester, glad you could make it, and you brought the loveliest flower in all of Wyoming." They were swept inside into a parlor buzzing with conversation. And then she saw him. Sheriff Holden. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes already locked on her. He had been there that night, 3 years ago. He had been one of the ones who stared with cold pity. The room started to shrink. The air grew thin. Vaughn's hand found the small of her back, a small, steady pressure that anchored her. "I'm right here." But then Mr. Caldwell pulled him away to talk horses with another rancher, and Tabitha was left alone. Elena Caldwell immediately swooped in, her daughter Clara in tow. "Tabitha, Clara has the most wonderful news, don't you, dear?" Clara, a sweet-faced girl of 20, beamed. "I'm getting married, and I was hoping, I was dreaming, you might make my wedding gown. No one in the territory has your talent." Tabitha was so relieved, so grateful for their kindness, that tears pricked her eyes. She pulled out her notepad, her hands shaking, and wrote that she would be honored. Neither of them rushed her. They waited patiently, talking to her as if she were just any other woman. Across the room, she saw Vaughn watching her. He gave her a small, encouraging smile. But something was wrong. Elena Caldwell's eyes kept darting toward the door, toward Sheriff Holden. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a fear there that Tabitha recognized. It was the same fear that lived in her own heart. What was Mrs. Caldwell afraid of? Dinner was a nightmare. Tabitha was seated between Vaughn and Mrs. Caldwell, but directly across from Sheriff Holden. He watched her throughout the entire meal, a strange, calculating look on his face. Finally, after 3 glasses of whiskey, he leaned forward. "Still not talking, Miss Kingsley?" He boomed, and the whole table went quiet. "Been 3 years now, hasn't it, since the Comanche got your parents' wagon?" Tabitha froze, the fork halfway to her mouth. The story, the town story, the lie that had covered up the truth. "Tragic thing," Holden went on, slurring his words slightly. "Doctor says the shock of seeing it just stole your voice right out of you. Funny thing, though, the report said the Comanches took everything of value, but they left your locket, the silver one your mother always wore." Tabitha's blood ran cold. How did he know about the locket? She had been wearing it under her dress. No one was supposed to know. Vaughn's voice was like ice. "Sheriff, that's enough." "Just making conversation," Holden said with a sloppy grin. "The whole town knows the story, or at least the story we were told." He looked directly at Tabitha, his eyes sharp and sober now. "But a story's just words. And you, Miss Kingsley, you don't have any of those, do you?" The room was spinning. The lie and the truth were twisting together in her head. Vaughn was on his feet. "We're leaving." He helped Tabitha from her chair, his hand firm on her arm. As they reached the door, Elena Caldwell caught her hand. "Don't listen to him," she whispered, her face pale. "Please, you have to be careful." Careful of what? Or who? The ride back was dead silent. Vaughn didn't push. He didn't pry. He just drove the buggy, his jaw tight. He pulled to a stop not at her house, but in a clearing by the creek under a thick blanket of stars. He turned to her, his face grim in the moonlight. "The story the sheriff told," he said, his voice quiet. "The Comanche attack. It's not true, is it?" Tabitha stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shook her head. "I didn't think so," he said. "And the story everyone tells about William Caldwell, about you losing your voice when he proposed. That's not the whole truth either." Tabitha went completely still. No one knew the full story of that night. No one but her. How could this stranger, this man she'd known for less than a week, know her deepest, most guarded secret? She fumbled for her notepad, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pencil. He stopped her, his hand covering hers. "You don't have to write it down," he said, his gray eyes searching her face. "I already know. I know you didn't lose your voice because of a broken heart. I know you lost it because of what you saw. And I know," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "that your parents didn't die in a wagon raid." The world tilted on its axis. Every fear she had, pushed down for 3 years, came rushing back. Who was this man? "Who I am," he said, as if reading her mind, "is the only friend you have in this town, Tabitha." "Because the people who killed your parents," he said, his voice flat and cold, "are still here in Sweetwater, and they're starting to wonder if you remember." The next morning, the knock on her door wasn't Vaughn. It was Sheriff Holden. He took off his hat, his face a mask of polite concern. "Miss Kingsley, I came to apologize for my conduct last night. The whiskey got the better of me." Tabitha just stared at him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "That Forrester fellow," Holden continued, his eyes scanning the inside of her shop, "seems mighty protective of you. You should be careful with a man like that." His tone shifted, losing the fake apology and gaining a hard edge. "I sent a few telegrams. Turns out Mr. Forrester has a past, a dark one. He was in a shooting in Denver 2 years back. Killed a man." Tabitha felt a jolt of fear, but it was mixed with something else. Confusion. "The report called it self-defense," Holden said with a shrug. "But the man he killed wasn't some nobody. He was a Pinkerton agent, and he wasn't the first person to get in Vaughn Forrester's way and end up in a pine box." He put his hat back on. "A man with that much blood on his hands. You have to ask yourself what he's doing in a quiet town like Sweetwater, and what he wants with a woman who can't tell anyone his secrets." He left her standing there, his words hanging in the air like poison. A killer. The gentle, understanding man who had defended her was a killer. And the sheriff, was he warning her, or was he threatening her? Later that day, Vaughn arrived, a picnic basket in his hand. "Thought we could go down to the creek," he said, his smile warm. "It's too nice a day to be cooped up inside." Tabitha couldn't move. She couldn't smile back. His smile faded. "What is it? What's wrong?" She took out her notepad, her hand steady now. She wrote 2 words. "Denver. Pinkerton." Vaughn's face went blank. All the warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. "Holden," he said. It wasn't a question. He ran a hand through his hair, his back to her. "I should have told you." "Is it true?" she wrote. He turned to face her, and his eyes were filled with a weariness that seemed ancient. "Yes, it's true. I killed him." The confession, so blunt and so quiet, was more shocking than Holden's accusation. "He wasn't the first," Vaughn continued, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "And I doubt he'll be the last. They've been hunting me for years, Tabitha. My real name isn't Vaughn Forrester, and I'm not a horse trainer." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. I came to Sweetwater for one reason, he said, taking a step closer. I came here for you. Your father. He and I were in the same line of work. We were part of an organization, one that the Pinkertons and men like them want to destroy. Tabitha could only stare, her mind struggling to make sense of his words. Your father wasn't just a rancher, Tabitha. He was a keeper of secrets, dangerous secrets, and when he and your mother were murdered, those secrets didn't die with them. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like he could see into her soul. They passed to you. Your silence. It's not from trauma. Not entirely. It's a lock, a key. Your mind buried the memory of that night so deep that no one could ever force it out of you. Because you're not just the only witness to your parents' murder. He leaned in closer, his voice a raw whisper. You're the only one who knows where your father hid the evidence. Vaughn, or whatever his real name was, explained it all in a low, urgent voice. His organization was a clandestine network fighting back against the powerful land barons and corrupt railroad men who were trying to steal the West from ordinary settlers. Her father had been one of their key agents, gathering proof of their crimes. James Caldwell isn't just a rancher, Vaughn said, his voice laced with contempt. He's a kingpin. He's been systematically forcing smaller ranchers off their land for years. Those who won't sell. They have accidents, fires, raids blamed on Indians. Your parents found out. They had collected a ledger. Names, dates, payments, proof of everything. They were going to take it to the federal marshals. Tabitha felt a wave of dizziness. Mr. Caldwell, the man who had always been so kind, who had treated her like a daughter. The night you lost your voice, Vaughn continued, pacing her small shop. It wasn't about William's proposal. That was just a coincidence. You saw something else at that party, didn't you? Something that scared you. A memory flickered in the back of her mind. A brief, whispered argument between her father and Mr. Caldwell in the study. Raised voices, a look of pure fury on Caldwell's face. She nodded slowly. They knew they'd been discovered, Vaughn said. They followed your parents home that night. They weren't there to talk. Tears started to stream down Tabitha's face. The official story had been a lie, a comfortable lie the town had told itself. The truth was a monster. I believe your father hid the ledger somewhere on your property, Vaughn said. And the key to finding it is locked in your memory of that night. Caldwell knows it. That's why he's kept you close. Why Elena is so nice to you. They're watching you, waiting to see if you remember. Sheriff Holden's visit now made a terrifying kind of sense. He wasn't warning her about Vaughn. He was trying to drive a wedge between them, to isolate her. Holden is on Caldwell's payroll, Vaughn confirmed, along with half the other men in this town. We're on our own, Tabitha. He took her hands in his. They were warm and strong. I made a promise to your father that if anything ever happened to him, I would find you, I would protect you, and I would help you finish what he started. The picnic basket sat forgotten on the table. Their simple budding romance had just exploded into a conspiracy of murder and betrayal. He was a stranger with a fake name and a violent past. But as she looked into his steady gray eyes, she knew. He was the only person in the world she could trust. That night they searched the house. Every floorboard, every wall, every drawer. Nothing. It has to be here, Vaughn muttered, running a frustrated hand through his hair. He wouldn't have taken it with him. Too risky. Tabitha pointed to the workshop. It was the one place they hadn't torn apart. It was her space, her sanctuary. They started with the bolts of fabric, unrolling each one. Then the boxes of thread, the jars of buttons. It was in the last place they looked. A heavy, unassuming wooden chest where she kept her scrap material. Taped to the underside of the lid was a small, flat leather pouch. Vaughn opened it carefully. Inside wasn't a ledger. It was a single sheet of paper, covered in her father's neat handwriting. But it wasn't words. It was a cipher, a complex jumble of numbers and symbols. "I've seen this before," Vaughn breathed, his eyes wide. "It's a book cipher. You need a specific book, a specific edition, to decode it." Tabitha's eyes immediately went to the small bookshelf in the corner of the main room. Her father's books. There were maybe a dozen of them. A Bible, some Shakespeare, a few books on animal husbandry. They tried the Bible first. Page 1, line 1, word 1. Gibberish. They tried the next book, and the next. Hours passed. The moon climbed high in the sky. Nothing worked. The message remained locked away. "Think, Tabitha," Vaughn urged, his voice gentle but firm. Was there a book he treasured, one he read all the time? She thought back. Her father hadn't been a big reader. He was a man of action, of the outdoors. But her mother had loved poetry. There was one book, a slim volume of poems, that her mother used to read to her every night. After her mother died, her father had kept it on his bedside table. But the book wasn't on the shelf. She hadn't seen it in years. She had assumed it had been lost or packed away. Then she remembered. After everything happened, Mrs. Caldwell had helped her clean out her parents' bedroom. Elena Caldwell had boxed up some of her mother's personal effects, saying she would keep them safe for her. Among them, Tabitha now remembered with a sickening certainty, was the book of poetry. She scribbled a frantic note to Vaughn. His face hardened. "She has it. She's had it this whole time." It wasn't an act of kindness. Elena Caldwell had taken the key. The next day, Sweetwater felt different. The stares weren't just curious anymore. They were hostile. Jared Walsh stood outside the blacksmith shop as she walked by, and for the first time, he didn't say a word. He just watched her, his eyes cold and empty. They knew she was with Vaughn, that they were looking for something. The net was tightening. "We have to get that book," Vaughn said that evening, his voice a low whisper in her darkened shop. "But we can't just walk in and ask for it. The Caldwell Ranch is a fortress." He was right. Caldwell had a dozen ranch hands who were more like guards. Getting onto the property undetected would be impossible. "We need a distraction," Vaughn said. "Something big enough to pull everyone away from the main house." His eyes lit up with a dangerous idea. "Caldwell's prized bull," he said. "The one he paid a fortune for. If it got loose, if it started a stampede in the northern pasture, everyone, including Caldwell, would be drawn out there. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was their only shot. The plan was set for the following night. Vaughn would handle the stampede. Her job was simpler, but no less terrifying. She was to go to the Caldwell's dinner party. They had another one scheduled, a smaller affair. Elena had already sent the invitation, her insistence feeling more like a summons now. "You have to act normal," Vaughn instructed. "She'll be watching you. While everyone is distracted by the commotion, you slip into the study. That's where she keeps your mother's things. I saw the box when I was there before." His hand closed over hers. "Get the book, and get out. I'll meet you at the creek." The next evening, as she dressed for the party, Tabitha's hands trembled so badly she could barely fasten the buttons on her dress. She was walking into the lion's den. Vaughn met her at the edge of town. He wasn't coming with her. It was too risky for them to be seen together. "Be careful," he said, his eyes dark with worry. He pressed something small and cold into her hand. A derringer. Tiny, but deadly. "Just in case," he whispered. "I hope to God you don't have to use it." She tucked the little pistol into a hidden pocket in her skirt, and then she walked, alone, towards the bright, welcoming lights of the Caldwell Ranch, the place where all her nightmares were born. The dinner was even more tense than the last one. There were only 8 people at the table. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, Sheriff Holden, 2 of Caldwell's most trusted foremen, and a few others Tabitha didn't recognize. They all watched her. They all smiled, but their smiles were like masks. Elena kept patting her hand, asking if she was feeling all right. "You seem pale, dear," she said, her eyes boring into Tabitha's. Tabitha just nodded, forcing a small, tight smile of her own. She ate little, her stomach in knots, her ears straining for the sound that would signal the start of Vaughn's plan. An hour passed, then another. The conversation was stilted, forced. Caldwell was talking about a new land acquisition, laughing about how he'd managed to buy out a homesteader for pennies on the dollar. Tabitha felt a surge of cold fury. He was talking about her neighbors, her friends. Suddenly a shout came from outside. A ranch hand burst into the dining room, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Caldwell, it's the bull. He's broken out of his pen. He's spooked the whole northern herd. They're running wild, heading for the gorge." Caldwell slammed his fist on the table, his face purple with rage. "Idiot! I told you to secure that gate." He and his men were on their feet in an instant, grabbing rifles from the rack by the door. "All of you, with me, now," he bellowed. Sheriff Holden followed, pausing only to give Tabitha a long, suspicious look. In the chaos, they were all gone, leaving Tabitha alone in the dining room with the trembling Elena Caldwell. "Oh, dear Lord," Elena whispered, wringing her hands. "That bull is worth more than the whole town." This was her chance. Tabitha stood up, pretending to be shaken. She gestured toward the parlor, as if to say she was going to sit and compose herself. Elena nodded distractedly, her attention focused on the sounds of shouting men and panicked cattle outside. Tabitha didn't go to the parlor. She slipped down the hall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and pushed open the door to James Caldwell's study. The room was dark, smelling of leather and cigar smoke. Her eyes scanned the shelves, and there it was. A simple wooden box on a high shelf, with her mother's initials carved into the lid. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a chair over and climbed up to get it. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst her mother's lace handkerchiefs and silver hairbrush, was the book. A slim volume, bound in worn blue leather. She grabbed it, tucking it into the deep pocket of her dress, her fingers brushing against the cold steel of the derringer. She was just about to replace the box when she saw it. Underneath where the book had been, there was something else. A single folded piece of paper. It wasn't her mother's. The handwriting was a man's, elegant and flowing. Curiosity got the better of her. She unfolded it. It was a letter. A love letter. And it wasn't from her father. It was signed, "All my love, James." James Caldwell. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her mother and James Caldwell. They were having an affair. Suddenly a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Tabitha froze, her blood turning to ice. She wasn't alone in the house. The study door swung open. It wasn't Elena. It was Sheriff Holden. "I had a feeling you were up to something, Miss Kingsley," he said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "Caldwell was worried the bull was just a distraction. He sent me back to check on his most valuable asset." His eyes weren't on her. They were on the open box in her hands. And the letter. His smile vanished. "What? What is that?" he stammered, his face going pale. He took a step into the room, his hand reaching for the gun at his hip. "You shouldn't have seen that," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Nobody was supposed to see that." The story she had believed, the story Vaughn had told her, it was all wrong. It wasn't a land deal. It was a crime of passion. Her father must have found the letters. He must have confronted Caldwell. And Caldwell had silenced him. Forever. Holden raised his pistol, his aim unsteady. "Give me the book and the letter, and maybe I'll just say I found you fainted on the floor." Tabitha's mind was racing. The stampede was Vaughn's distraction. It would draw everyone, including Caldwell, far away from the house. Everyone but the man standing in front of her, the man who was about to kill the only witness. Her hand slipped into her pocket, her fingers closing around the derringer. It was so small, a toy compared to Holden's Colt. But it was all she had. As Holden took another step forward, she pulled it out. Her two hands needed to hold it steady. He stopped, his eyes widening in surprise. He hadn't expected her to be armed. Then he laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think you can use that thing? A little girl like you?" He took another step. The house was silent, except for the frantic beating of her own heart. The shouts from outside were distant, fading. She was alone with her parents' killer. Because it wasn't Caldwell who had pulled the trigger that night. She knew it, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty. It was the man in front of her. The loyal dog, cleaning up his master's mess. He lunged. A deafening bang filled the small room. The derringer kicked back hard, the noise shockingly loud in the confined space. Holden staggered backward, a look of pure astonishment on his face. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his shirt, then back up at her. "You," he gasped, and then he crumpled to the floor. Tabitha stared, her ears ringing, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. She hadn't meant to kill him, only to stop him. But he was dead. She was sure of it. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She had to get out. She grabbed the book, stuffing the incriminating letter inside it, and ran. Out of the study, down the hall, out the back door of the ranch house. The night air was cold against her flushed skin. The sounds of the stampede were closer now, a terrifying thunder of hooves and panicked bellows. She ran toward the creek, toward the meeting point, her feet stumbling on the uneven ground. She could hear shouting behind her. Someone must have heard the shot. She reached the creek, her lungs burning, and plunged into the shallow, icy water, scrambling up the other side. "Vaughn!" she whispered, the soundless word tearing at her throat. He was there, appearing out of the shadows like a ghost, his horse waiting patiently. He took one look at her face, at the pistol still clutched in her hand, and knew something had gone terribly wrong. "What happened?" he demanded, helping her onto his horse. She couldn't write, couldn't explain. She just pushed the book into his hands. He didn't ask again. He spurred the horse, and they galloped away from the ranch, away from the chaos and the death she had left behind. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the moon their only guide. Finally, Vaughn pulled the horse to a halt in a hidden rocky canyon miles from Sweetwater. He helped her down, his hands gentle. "Tabitha," he said softly, "talk to me. Tell me what happened." She just shook her head, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on her face. He took the book from his saddlebag. The letter from Caldwell to her mother was still tucked inside. He read it, his face grim in the pale moonlight. "My God," he whispered, "it was never about the land." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a terrible understanding. "Holden found you in the study," he guessed. She nodded, trembling. She showed him the derringer, then made a gesture, a quick, sharp motion. "You shot him," Vaughn stated, his voice flat. "Is he dead?" She nodded again. Vaughn closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, his expression was resolved, hard as granite. "All right," he said. "This changes things. We can't use the law. Not now. Caldwell owns the law, and now you're a killer in their eyes. There's only one way to end this." He opened the book of poetry. "We find the ledger," he said, his voice grim. and we burned James Caldwell's empire to the ground. Using the book, they started to decode the cipher. Page number, line number, word number. It was slow, painstaking work by the light of a small shielded fire. The message began to take shape. It wasn't a list of locations. It was a story. A memory, her father's final message to her. My dearest Tabitha, if you are reading this, I am gone. Remember the day we built the stone wall by the northern pasture? The day you lost your silver locket? The locket? The one Holden had mentioned at the party. She reached under her dress and pulled it out. It was a simple silver oval, a gift from her father. The message continued. You were so upset. You cried until your mother said, "Don't worry, little bird. The foundation is the safest place for secrets." The foundation, the stone wall. He hid it inside the wall, Vaughn breathed. It's been there this whole time. They had to go back to the property that was now a crime scene, crawling with Caldwell's men. It was suicide. But they had no choice. They traveled by night, hiding during the day. When they finally reached the hills overlooking her old home, the sight made Tabitha's stomach clench. A posse, led by James Caldwell himself, was combing the area. They were hunting her. We'll wait for them to move on, Vaughn whispered, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. They can't search forever. They watched for 2 days from their hiding spot in the rocks. On the third day, the posse rode out, heading east, following a false trail Vaughn had laid. This was their chance. They moved under the cover of dusk, creeping like shadows toward the northern pasture. The stone wall was still there, running along the edge of the property. It was half finished, just as her father had left it. Where? Vaughn whispered, scanning the long wall. Tabitha closed her eyes, trying to remember that day. She had been so small. Her father was laughing, setting the heavy stones. She had been playing nearby, making a small fortress for her dolls. She had tucked her locket inside a little gap between 2 stones for safekeeping. When she went to get it, it had slipped, falling down into the wall's foundation. She remembered the exact spot. A large, flat rock at the very base, near an old oak tree. She pointed. Vaughn took out a crowbar he'd brought. He worked it into the gap beneath the stone. It was heavy. He strained, his muscles bunching. The rock refused to move. Suddenly, a voice cut through the twilight. Looking for this? They spun around. James Caldwell stood there, not 10 feet away. And in his hand, he held a thick, leather-bound ledger. He hadn't been fooled by the false trail. He had been waiting. My wife was a sentimental woman, Caldwell said, his voice dripping with false sorrow. She told me all about this wall, about this special spot. 2 of his foremen stepped out from behind the trees, rifles leveled at Vaughn and Tabitha. I should thank you, Caldwell said with a sickening smile. I never would have figured out the cipher without you. He must have found the decoded portion they had left at their camp. It's over, Caldwell said. You have nothing, and now I'll have the pleasure of seeing you both hang for the murder of a lawman. Vaughn slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Caldwell's. All was lost. They had failed. Tabitha looked at the ledger in Caldwell's hand, her parents' last hope, their justice, and she felt something snap inside her. A dam of silence that had held for 3 long years. A single word broke from her lips. Hoarse, cracked, unused, but loud enough for everyone to hear. No. Everyone froze. Caldwell stared at her, his jaw slack with disbelief. His men looked confused. Even Vaughn seemed stunned for a second. The sound of her own voice was a shock, a physical jolt. But the dam was broken. The words held back for so long came flooding out. You killed them, she said, her voice raspy but growing stronger with every word. You killed my mother and my father. She pointed a trembling finger at Caldwell. "You had an affair with my mother. My father found out. He was going to expose you for the cheat and the liar you are." Caldwell's face, once confident, was now a mask of pure fury. "Shut her up," he snarled at his men. But they hesitated, mesmerized by the impossible sight of the mute girl speaking. "You didn't even have the guts to do it yourself," Tabitha continued, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "You sent your dog, Holden, to do your dirty work. He killed them. He murdered them in cold blood, and I saw it all." The memory, complete and terrifyingly clear, slammed into her. She had been hiding in the pantry. She saw Holden shoot her father. She saw her mother, in her last moments, look at her, her eyes wide, putting a finger to her own lips. "Be silent." It wasn't a curse. It was a command, a mother's last desperate act to save her child. "The ledger isn't about land," she cried, tears of grief and rage streaming down her face. "It's about you, your secret accounts, the money you stole, the life you built on lies." "I said shut her up," Caldwell screamed, raising his own pistol. He fired. Vaughn moved faster than thought, shoving Tabitha to the ground and drawing his own gun in a single fluid motion. A shot rang out, then another. One of Caldwell's men fell. The other turned and ran. Caldwell stood alone, his pistol smoking, a look of wild panic in his eyes. He turned to run, but Vaughn was on him in an instant, tackling him to the ground. The ledger flew from his hands, landing in the dirt. Vaughn's fist connected with Caldwell's jaw, and the rancher went limp. It was over. Vaughn stood, breathing heavily, and looked down at Tabitha. She was sitting on the ground, her hands pressed to her mouth, the feel of her own voice still a strange vibration on her lips. He knelt in front of her, his gray eyes soft. "You did it, Tabitha," he whispered. "You found your voice." James Caldwell and his men were handed over to the federal marshals Vaughn had secretly contacted weeks earlier. The ledger, combined with Tabitha's eyewitness testimony, was enough to see him hang. The truth about her parents' murder and Elena Caldwell's long, silent complicity shocked the territory. The Caldwell empire crumbled into dust. Tabitha Kingsley, the mute girl, became a legend, the woman who found her voice to speak the truth. But she didn't stay in Sweetwater. There were too many ghosts there. She and Vaughn, whose real name she learned was Ethan, sold her parents' property and headed north, looking for a place to build a new life. They found it in a quiet valley in Montana, a place of tall pines and clear rivers. They married, and a year later, their daughter was born. They named her Faith. Ethan started his own ranch, his skill with horses becoming renowned. Tabitha opened a new sewing shop, but she spent most of her days raising their daughter, filling their small cabin with the warmth and love she had thought was lost to her forever. She could speak, but she often chose not to. She had learned the value of quiet. She had discovered that the most important things are often communicated without any words at all. One evening, years later, she and Ethan were sitting on their porch, watching Faith chase fireflies in the twilight. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, taking her hand. Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "I'm just listening," she said, her voice clear and soft. Listening to the peace. She had been through the fire and found her way out, not by shouting, but by finally learning when to break the silence. Her journey was a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about how loud you are, but about the courage to speak up when it matters most. If you were inspired by Tabitha's incredible story of finding her voice, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are stories all around us, waiting in the quiet for someone brave enough to tell them.